In the 2024 NBA Finals, Kyrie Irving was underwhelming, and that's putting it lightly. He averaged this 19.8 points per game, 3 rebounds per game, and 5 assists per game on 41.4, 27.6, 100 splits, and a 48.1 true shooting percentage. But what stood out even more was his struggles on the road compared to at home in these finals. He was incredible in the 2 games in Dallas, averaging 28 points per game, 3.5 rebounds per game, 4 assists per game on 50, 41.7, 100 splits, and a 58.1 true shooting percentage. However, in Boston, he was terrible, averaging just 14.3 points per game, 2.7 rebounds per game, and 5.7 assists per game on 33.9, 17.6, 100 shooting splits, and a 39.3 true shooting percentage. So it was clear that Kyrie wasn't up to standard on the road in these finals, and that's putting it lightly. And while we can look at some of the flaws with Luka in these finals, mainly his fourth quarter scoring and the defense for the most part in this series, I do think the conversation needs to be more about Kyrie, as well as the role players not stepping up, than it does about the guy who averaged 29, 9, and 6 in his first ever finals. Kyrie was supposed to be the guy who helped guide this Mavs roster. He was the guy with finals experience that was supposed to help weather the storm for a team that had no finals experience outside of him, and he severely underperformed when he was needed most, which was on the road. For 3 games in this series, he wasn't the co-star that the Mavs needed him to be, and he's a big reason why they lost in the NBA Finals. But quickly before we go any further, if you're new and like basketball, I'd really appreciate it if you would like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. I'm notified whenever I release a video. I make videos about basketball all the time, and liking and subscribing are the 2 best ways can help me on the YouTube algorithm, help support the channel, and help me reach my goal of 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Let's try and get 100 likes on this video so YouTube will recommend it to others. Anyways, let's talk about Kyrie. Kyrie Irving was awful at the rim in Boston. In the 3 games on the road, he shot 45.5% at the rim on 3.6 attempts per game. For context, that would put him in the first percentile for rim efficiency over the course of a full season. In Boston, Kyrie was performing at a bottom tier level at the rim. Considering he's usually a 61 to 62% guy at the rim in the regular season, to see him drop to this bad at the rim in Boston was shocking. Now, what was the cause for this? I do think Boston deserves credit for not making it easy on him at the rim. Horford did a good job on switches, Derek White was also just really good on him, and physical wings like Tatum and Brown were doing their job, but he also missed layups he usually hit. And I think that speaks a bit to the mental struggle he has playing in that building. It was a mix of him missing easy looks that he usually makes, which deserves a lot of criticism, especially for a player that's talked about the way he is, but also Boston just defended him well at the rim. They forced him into rest attempts, they were physical with him, and in the playoffs, if you can't handle the physicality to produce at the rim, you aren't going to be as effective when you are a player that is of the caliber that Kyrie is. Even if you are a special shot creator, even if you can hit tough shots, if you can't score at the rim, you aren't going to be the threat that you usually are. Look at all the teams that have won titles. The best players on those teams, for the most part, are guys that can get to the rim and produce. And Kyrie not being effective at the rim was a massive detriment to the Mavs on the road, on top of all of his other struggles in Boston. In Boston, Kyrie shot 40% from mid-range on 8.3 attempts per game. Now, he was a solid mid-range shooter in this series. These aren't terrible numbers on its own, it's not elite, but it's not awful either on that volume. But given the context of his rim struggles, on top of the fact he's statistically one of the best mid-range shooters ever, mid to low 50s on good volume in this area usually, it's fair to say he struggled as a mid-range shooter. And unlike the rim struggles where it was a combination of good defense and just uncharacteristic misses, in Boston, I felt like Kyrie had to work for every mid-range look. Boston was aware that he's a 3 levels threat, and they didn't make it easy on him. They didn't let him get clean looks. Almost all of his misses were off the bounce or off balance with a hand or a contest in his area. And while he's capable of hitting tough shots, he's one of the best tough shot makers ever, and he did shoot 40% on these looks, it wasn't enough to make up for his deficiencies on the other two levels of the court. If he was his usual self at the rim, if he was his usual self from three, which we will talk about soon, this would have been enough. But considering this was the only area that is anything close to average efficiency, and even then given the volume, it is below average. If you're going to take that many mid-range attempts, you should be taking more of an emphasis on being in the mid to high 40s, maybe even 50s from three. It wasn't enough to shoot 40% clearly. I'm a big believer in the mid-range. I believe it's a valuable source of offense for elite players like Kyrie Irving. But when it's the only source of somewhat respectable offense, it's not nearly as effective, and even then, it was well below his standard. In Boston, Kyrie shot 17.6% on 5.6 3-point attempts per game. On its own, that's unacceptable for a number 2 option on that volume. Add on to the fact he wasn't effective at the rim either, and it's dreadful. No way around it, really. But it's even worse when you add the context that Kyrie is an elite 3-point shooter, 39% on 6 attempts per game for his career, and since leaving Cleveland, he's at 40% on 7 attempts per game. He's one of the greatest 3-point shooters ever. He's had 50, 40, 90 seasons on high volume, so to see him shoot this poorly was jarring to say the least. And the numbers themselves are bad and could be the whole talking point. But when you watch the tape, it's even worse because there's really no excuse for it. He did take some tough shots against great defense. That can't be ignored. You're going to miss some of those shots. But even then, he was creating good space on these attempts as well and was just missing. You aren't going to hit every tough shot. But for an elite tough shot maker, to see him struggle like this was bizarre. And on top of that, what really stood out was the fact he was missing open looks. When defenders went under the screen or left him open, which should never happen, he was missing. And these are shots that he should be automatic with. The fact he couldn't capitalize on the easy looks he almost never gets is what stood out the most to me. What he did as a 3-point shooter in Boston isn't something that's acceptable for even an average shooter, let alone an elite one like Kyrie, especially when you add the context of him missing shots he usually hits, missing the open shots, and also struggling in a key source of offense, which is at the rim. And honestly, what he did as a 3-point shooter in Boston just wasn't acceptable for anyone that's capable of shooting. So why did Kyrie Irving struggle so much in Boston? Part of it is the mental aspect of the game. He struggles against Boston really since he left the team, and it showed when he played in the Garden. Every miss he had was magnified. Every miss he had energized that crowd and in turn energized the Celtics, which was already a tough matchup for them. It would be one thing if he was just missing really tough shots against great defense, but him missing easy looks as well only added fuel to the fire. Now, Boston does deserve credit here. Drew Holiday and Derek White are an elite defensive backcourt. You could argue they're the best defensive backcourt ever. Jalen was a monster defensively in this series. Tatum was physical as a defender. Horford and Porzingis did their job and even held their own on switches from time to time. Even guys like Hauser and Pritchard stepped up, even though they were at disadvantage and they were attacked defensively, they did what they could. But at the same time, great players step up when they are needed the most, and Kyrie didn't do that in Boston. Role players are supposed to be the foundation at home. There's a saying that goes along the lines of role players perform better at home. Stars are supposed to be the foundation that elevates teams on the road. And Kyrie was not a foundational piece that was at least positive on the road for the Mavs in this series. This is a guy who's been called the most skilled player ever. This is a guy who some consider a top 75 player to ever touch a basketball. This is a guy who got put in conversations with players who have had MVP caliber seasons at their peak, like Allen Iverson, Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, and Damian Lillard. These are guys that he was compared to that have proven they can be number ones on good teams. And Kyrie is in that discussion because of how elite he's been as a number two. There was so much hype for Kyrie going into these finals. He was great against the Clippers. He was great against the Timberwolves. There were times he was the best player on the floor in a Timberwolves series that featured his own teammate Luka, who I believe is one of the 3 to 4 best players in the world, and Anthony Edwards, who's a top 10 to 15 player in the world. And Kyrie had stretches where he just took over the game. People were talking about how this was Kyrie's chance to get revenge on Boston for how it ended, for how the fans treat him. A chance to finally take out that demon that's been haunting him since he left the team. And he didn't. He put up awful numbers. Numbers that would be disappointing if he was Bucks Eric Bledsoe. Running on a player who has proven he can be a big-time playoff performer like Kyrie has. It doesn't matter what tier of player you think he is all time. It doesn't matter if you think he's the most skilled player ever or not. He has a resume that suggests he severely underperformed on the road in the 2024 NBA Finals. A player of this caliber should not be statistically one of the worst scorers on 2 levels of the court, regardless of if it's on the road or not, regardless of if Boston's great defense or not. I'm not here to say Kyrie Irving is a bad player. He's a great player. He's one of the best shot creators I've ever seen. It's because he's a great player. It's because he's proven he can do it in the past that has made myself and many others very critical of what happened in the games at TD Garden in these finals. I'm not here to say Luka was perfect in these finals. I'm not here to say the role players were good for Dallas in these finals. But the second star in the team, being historically awful on the road, is a major factor. It might not be the biggest factor, but it's up there. The Mavericks needed to win at least one game in Boston to make this a series. Stars are supposed to rise to the occasion on the road, especially with an NBA title on the line. Kyrie knows that better than anyone because he was that star who rose to the occasion on the road in the 2016 NBA Finals against all the odds. But 8 years later, he was the complete opposite of that. And that's why the Mavericks lost in 5. They didn't get a win in Boston, and why they're headed into the offseason without a ring. But that's the end of this video. If you made it to this point, thank you so much. Again, haven't already, like, subscribe, hit notification bell, notified whenever I release a video. I make videos about basketball all the time, and liking and subscribing are the 2 best ways can help me out in the YouTube algorithm, help support the channel, and I'm going to reach my goal of 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Let's try and get 100 likes on this video so YouTube will recommend it to others. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Kyrie Irving in these finals. How do you think he performed? What do you think about his performance in Boston? Do you think he's the biggest reason that the Mavericks lost in the finals or weren't as competitive as you might have hoped? Do you think it was something else like Luka's defense or the role players? I'd love to hear all of that in the comment section down below. But with that being said, have a nice day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.